Alrighty, so I'm Cassie Vela. As you know, this is my biweekly market update of the San Antonio area, San Antonio and all of the surrounding small, municipalities and things that we kind of just refer to as the San Antonio area. COVID update, we're still, it looks like everything's still trending down or at least stable at a low rate. The risk factor right now is low. So on that scale that the city uses, it's pretty low. So things are going well. Kids are going back to school. Things are sort of starting to reopen. So, everybody keep your fingers crossed that it stays low like this for a while. And then the link that I always like to put, if you have tenants or if you yourself need some rent or mortgage assistance, this is a link that has a lot of good resources. All right, and then our showings that we've been tracking since March, you can see that they're sort of on a downward trend. October had, a little bit less than we had in the heat of the summer, but not a ton, and pretty comparable to last year. So we're kind of where we would expect to be for this time of year here in San Antonio in the showings of homes. And this is limited to just that like starter home, investor home price here. And then these are the rental showings, same thing. We're just slowing down a little bit. I would also say it could possibly be just a lower inventory. We have less homes that hit the market in October, November, December, January, especially rental homes, because a lot of investors really don't like to list during the holidays. So it could be that there are fewer people looking, but it could also be that there are fewer homes to look at. That can affect the amount of showings. But either way, we don't see anything that's unexpected. Same thing with the weekly home sales. We have this pattern of spiking at the end of the month, and I'm sure in a couple of weeks we'll see that little dip that we see every month previously. But the overall trend is just that the market is chugging along, and we've got a lot of sales going on, a very busy market. And I changed this one from last week. I finally figured out how to change the y-axis, or I finally spent the time to figure it out. And so we can see a little bit better trend line here. So obviously 20 or 30 grand isn't a huge amount if you're in California or New York or somewhere, but here in this market, that's 10%. So we've definitely seen quite a bit of price increase over time. And I think that is that confirms the anecdotal evidence that we all see, that we all are experiencing. But I like to see this because that confirms it. And we can say definitively, yes, the data shows that the price is going up a little bit faster than it normally would. And then this also confirms the same thing, the median sales price. I remember a couple of weeks ago, we were a little bit concerned of that dip there at the end of August, but it looks like September, it's kind of correcting a little bit. So that did not turn into anything to worry about. And then what I started doing, I originally made this for investors. And so I made it, that $100,000 to $200,000 range was the only one I would show. But I figured, let's just go ahead and show all of them. And that way we can kind of compare which ranges are performing the best or the worst or anything, any red flags. We can keep an eye on all of that, especially helpful if you are flipping. And so you can see here, all of the pending sales are down, and then on closing sales as well. But just like I said with the showings, I think that's probably attributed more to lower inventory than less people wanting to buy. There's still a lot of people wanting to buy. There's just less homes on the market. And the way that I know that that's true is from the days on market. So if the market were slowing down and there were less sales because the market was slowing down, then the days on market would be higher. Obviously, that's not the case. We have an extremely low days on market, especially in that $100,000 to $200,000 range that we have looked at in the past. I mean, that is, 25 days on market is incredible. The most interesting to me was the higher end homes, the orange line there, that drastic drop. So we did kind of anecdotally see that over the past year in 2019, the story of San Antonio was, okay, if you're under 250,000, your home's going to sell really fast, and it's going to fly off the market. But if you're over that, it's going to be a little bit slower. And so that was kind of what we saw. And then it's what we kind of got used to as realtors too. Like, oh, okay, well, I don't need to show it today because it'll sit longer, right? Like it's a higher end home. That is not true anymore. We have the drastic dip, just like all of the other market segments show, even for that really high end. So I just think that's really interesting. And it just shows you that, people there's still a buying frenzy caused by the low interest rates. I think that it applies like across the board. Everybody who's stuck in their home during COVID is looking at everything they hate about their home and seeing the lower interest rate that they could buy a more home for their money, and trying to move. So even in those higher ranges, that's happening. That's the anecdotal. I mean, that's what I think is causing this drop in days on market. And then I decided, I've had a lot of people recently ask me how the market fluctuates on a yearly cycle. So, the spring versus the winter. And so I wanted to see some hard data on that. And this is sales actually, and this is the days on market. So you can see that, in the lower price homes, the homes that, I said earlier have, historically been really quick to sell in San Antonio, the starter home segment, the ticks and valleys are not so drastic. It's pretty consistent across the board. It fluctuates a few days, but not too much. In those higher end homes is where we do see a big fluctuation in days on market if you compare, winter to summer months. So you can see there we've got a difference of like 40 days on market in that highest price range. So it's just something to keep in mind if you are selling a home and we're going into those months that it's going to sit on the market longer. If you think about it, the spike in January, that's the day it was sold, and so the days on market was listed in October if it sat for 90 days. Does that make sense? And so we're kind of heading into the time of year where if you're in that higher end section of the market, you may want to wait to sell in the spring, or just know that you're going to have it may sit longer. But the thing I really wanted to know was how many does this affect the price? So we see that it affects the days on market clearly, but what about the price? And it doesn't. I mean, these are basically flat lines if you look at them from far away. So the market here does not necessarily, you're not going to get a lower price for your home, or you're not going to sell it for more in the summer. It's going to be how long it sits on the market. And so I think that's important to know for everyone, but especially as investors. I think sometimes people think, well, if I buy in December, I can pay less for the same house. And that's not true. In December, you are more likely to get a deal because there are fewer competitors. Like that's when a lot of people take a break, but you're not necessarily going to pay less for the home, if that makes sense. And then I wanted to run sort of the same analysis with rentals, because a lot of people, a lot of investors are just terrified that their rental is going to be empty in December. Like, oh, that's the worst thing that could possibly happen. So I wanted to see, like, is it, does that really affect it? And then the system that I had to use to pull the data didn't want to pull as much data as I wanted it to pull. So I had to break it into smaller segments of the market to be able to do it. So I went ahead and I broke it into the Northeast side. So that's like the Live Oak, Converse, Universal City, kind of that, you know, 78233, like that area right there on the Northeast side, which is a great area for investors for rentals. And then the Northwest side, um, which is like from 151 to I-10 between the loops. And so on the Northeast side, we see a little bit of a fluctuation on the days on market. You're looking at like maybe 20 days on market. As hot as the market has been lately, the days on market have been so low. It's maybe the fluctuation will be greater this year, or maybe it won't spike up as much. It won't get to 60 days on market. I hesitate to predict anything with COVID and this crazy economy we've been in. But it's nice to see that there's some difference, but it's not super drastic. And then just like with homes, we see that the sold price or the rented price actually on those, it stays consistent. You're not going to rent a home for significantly less in December than you are in April. It's just going to sit a little bit longer. So if you're running your numbers, especially if you're acquiring a new rental in December or January or even November, you might want to, I wouldn't use a lower rent price, but I would definitely use a little bit higher vacancy rate just for that first time getting it rented. And then try to, of course, do the 14-month lease or something like that. And then on the Northwest side, we see a little bit, about the same fluctuation. It's a little bit more pronounced than on the Northeast side. And I would guess that maybe has to do with there being 2 military bases on the Northeast side, but kind of the same here. We've got a variance of 30 days on market at the most. And again, it's not going to change the price. The price is going to stay pretty consistent, what it would be in the spring. And I will say, just even in listing things during November, December, there's still people looking at San Antonio. We have so many military bases. We have so much medical. There's always people moving here. I would say in December, it's actually a little bit, it's easier to show tenants houses because during the summer you have a lot of tire kickers who just want to go look at other houses but they don't need to move. I mean, in December, they need to move, like they're serious. So I think you sometimes find even easier tenant to work with during that period. So don't be afraid at all to list your home for rent during the winter. It's just not as big of a deal here as it might be in other markets.